going on, guys? It's Nick here, back with another video. Week 8 waiver wire ads. There are only 2 teams on bye this week, the Ravens and the Cowboys, so you are less likely to need a fill-in than you were over the last 2 weeks. But, of course, it's still possible you need a little bit of help on the waiver wire. At this point, we're looking more for players who have potential later on than guys that you can bring in and start right away, but of course we'll go over both. So, remember that I'm recording this prior to the Monday night game, so if something big happens there, then it's not a big deal. I'm going to pin a comment anyways to have the timestamps, so just look at that for any sort of update if someone big gets injured. And a quick note on the timestamps, it's in the description if I haven't pinned the comment yet, but it is always there. So, we're going to start things off the exact same way we did last week with Walton. Last week, I told you to pick up Walton because he'd passed Balaj on the depth chart and he was approaching a 50-50 split with Drake. Well, this week, he outsnapped Drake 43-29 and outtouched him 15-9. Any running back getting 15 touches needs to be owned in all leagues, especially with Drake on the trade block. There's a potential that over the next week or two, Drake gets traded, opening up even more touches for Walton. I know the upside is capped on the Dolphins, but he has 17 or 18 touch upside if Drake ever gets traded, so he shouldn't be a free agent. Another running back we need to talk about is Ty Johnson. So Kerryon Johnson left early on Sunday with a knee injury, and he was seen in a brace afterwards. Right now, we don't know how bad it is. We don't know if he's in danger of missing week 8 or not. But if he is, then Ty Johnson is the top waiver claim. He didn't do that great this week, but the Vikings are a really good defense, so that's not exactly shocking. He had 10 carries, and he had 4 receptions on his 4 targets, and did work as the lead back and the red zone back over McKissick. If we get word that Kerryon Johnson will not miss any time, then you don't need to go after Ty Johnson because he's not one of the premium handcuffs. However, his receiving game role is big enough to warrant the top overall claim if it does look like Kerryon Johnson is going to miss time. If we don't have any news on this situation by Tuesday night when you have to finish putting in your claims, I do think we will have news, but if we have none, then I would still spend a top claim on Ty Johnson because it's rare you get a running back on a decent offense that has a nice passing game role on free agency. So even for that upside, I would spend the top claim to get him, but it would definitely be nice if we get some sort of update later today as I'm recording this or sometime on Tuesday. I also have to mention the 2 names that I bring up every week because they're the top upside options if you have space on your bench, but I mention them every week, so I'm only going to spend a few seconds on them, and it's Chase Edmonds and Alexander Mattison. They should be 100% owned. We just saw what Chase Edmonds can do if David Johnson is ever out, and they've already been trying to get him looks even when David Johnson was actually getting touches, so you need to go out and get him. And then Mattison is the exact same way and has the same, if not more, upside if Cook goes down. I also want to mention Darius Guice. You do not need to add him yet, but it's possible he starts practicing either this week or next week, and he'll be eligible to return 2 weeks after they activate him. So if he starts practicing this week, then he could return after their week 10 bye. If your league has an IR spot and you're not using it, then it's not a terrible idea to just add him when waivers clear, put him in the IR, and then it's like nothing happened. You know, you can go add another player or just keep your team the same way. If you don't have an IR spot and you don't have, say, 7 or 8 bench spots, then you probably have better options and you don't need to add him just yet. But I definitely want you to keep him in mind and just watch out and see when does he start practicing, because it's 2 weeks after that when they can play him. That's really it for the running back position. Let's move on to wide receiver. And the top option this week is Kenny Stills. We saw Will Fuller leave early on Sunday with a hamstring injury. Fuller's definitely no stranger to lower body injuries, and a hamstring is definitely a concern with a speed receiver. Stills should just slide right in to Will Fuller's role, and he did well in that role this week, catching 4 of 5 targets for 105 yards. He is the top ad at the wide receiver position this week and would likely be the top ad if we get word that Kerryon Johnson is not going to miss any time, and especially so if you're a Will Fuller owner and you were relying on him in the flex. It's really not that big of a downgrade. It's a downgrade, but not that big of one. Cole Beasley is also an option. He plays the Eagles this week, and the Bills have actually been really smart in how they game plan each week this season. So I expect them to know how bad the Philly pass defense is and to exploit that. So we could see a really big game from Josh Allen this week, and whenever we get a high volume passing game from Allen, Beasley is a flex option. Plus, he faces Washington, Cleveland, and Miami after that. So his next month sets up really nicely for matchups. So if you've got an injury or you've got someone on bye, Beasley can actually slide into your starting lineup this week and get the job done. Next, we have Alex Erickson, and this is more of an ad in a 12-team league if you need someone for this week, or for a little bit more depth in a 14 or 16-team league. Probably wouldn't touch him in a 10-team league. He does have 20 targets over his last 2 weeks, but he went off this week, so that's a little bit more skewed towards this week, and I wouldn't expect him to go off all that often. The earliest AJ Green can return is week 10, and I'm honestly not sure he plays another snap for the Bengals this season, or really ever if they trade him. They're 0-7, so they have no incentive to bring him back this season. Maybe if they were like 4-3 or maybe 3-4, they'd say, okay, let's try and get this guy back. Let's try and make a playoff push. They're 0-7. They know they're not making the playoffs, so I don't know why they would bring him back until he's absolutely 100%, and I don't know really why they wouldn't try and trade him and try and start some sort of rebuild. So Erickson should have a near full-time role for the rest of the season. Plus the Bengals love to throw the ball, and they're probably going to be chasing points most weeks. At tight end, we actually have a few options this week, so we can start off with Jonnu Smith. We saw Delanie Walker leave Sunday's game with an ankle injury. He was questionable going into the week with that injury, so it was an aggravation, not a new injury. And then Jonnu Smith caught all 3 of his targets for 64 yards. And he's going to be an every down player if Delanie Walker misses any time. This is important not only because tight end is so thin, but also because they play the Bucs in week 8, and we know how good of a matchup tight ends are against the Bucs. So he'd be a legitimate tight end 1 if Walker is not healthy enough to play this week. So if you're a Walker owner or your tight end is on bye or hurt, then Jonnu Smith is probably your best option this week. You could also go to Dallas Goedert. He's been used a lot more now that he's recovered from his calf injury, and it doesn't take a whole lot to be a tight end 1 these days. So it's worth pointing out that over the last month, the last 4 games, he has just 7 fewer full PPR points than Zach Ertz does. Now, he does have fewer air yards. He does have a much shallower ADOT, but he's playing 70 to 75% of snaps, and we all know how talented he is. So if you really need a tight end, it's Jonnu Smith, it's Dallas Goedert, and if those are taken, or if you just don't like those names, then you can also look at Irv Smith. He's been in on about half of the snaps in recent weeks, and they might have to get him a little bit more involved if Adam Thielen can't play this week. They face Washington on Thursday night, and since it's a game they should easily win, it would be smart for them to just hold Adam Thielen out and make sure he's 100% recovered from his hamstring injury. And if that's the case, Irv Smith could be relied on for, say, 3 to 5 targets this week, and against the bad defense, maybe that's enough for him to sneak into back-end tight end 1 production. Quarterback streamers is next, and the top week 8 streaming option is Josh Allen versus the Eagles if he's available. The Eagles are the biggest pass funnel, and the Bills are going to exploit that. Plus, he adds a lot of points with his legs. Gardner Minshew at home versus the Jets is also an option. They're another pass funnel, and Minshew has shown really stable production with just one game under 16 fantasy points. You've got Matthew Stafford versus the Giants, especially if it looks like Kerryon Johnson is going to be out, because if he is, they're going to have to lean on the pass, and the Giants blow, so he should have a good game. We've got Kirk Cousins at home against his former team in Washington. Kirk has over 300 yards and multiple scores in 3 consecutive games, even while averaging just 30 pass attempts per game. They're probably going to be able to just run the ball and win the game. Since they'd prefer to do that, it's the most likely game script. So he is behind the quarterbacks I've already mentioned, but he absolutely has some upside facing his former team. We've got Teddy Bridgewater at home in likely his final game as a starter. He faces a Cardinals defense that, even though they have Peterson back now, still isn't all that good. He has 30 or more pass attempts in 5 out of 6 weeks, and although the upside really isn't there, this is a matchup where he could see a spiked week, especially since he knows it'll likely be his last game as a starter, and the coaching staff knows that as well. So maybe they try and get a game where he throws for a couple touchdowns. It is possible that Breeze does come back and plays this week, but I'd be pretty surprised. They've played really well with Teddy, and obviously Breeze is a great upgrade, but if they have the bye in week 9, it just makes sense to wait for Breeze to be 100% healthy. They can win without him this week against Arizona, so try and get this win, go on bye, and then bring him back in week 10. I think that's what they're going to do, but obviously you can't be starting Teddy if they do bring Breeze back. You could also play Sam Darnold at Jacksonville. The Jags defense isn't all that good anymore, and even if Sam looks bad against the Patriots on Monday night, this is still an offense on the rise, so I'd feel good about starting him in week 8. Then if all of these guys are somehow taken, then you can start Ryan Tannehill at home against the Bucs pass funnel defense. Moving on to defensive streamers, the top ad this week is the Steelers against the Dolphins. I told you to add them last week, so hopefully you've already done that. If you didn't, then try and get them, but if you can't, then the next best ad is the Titans versus the Bucs. The Titans are always a viable streamer when they're at home, especially when they're favored, and especially when they play a turnover-prone quarterback like Jameis. You can also add the Lions versus the Giants. I know they just got destroyed by the Vikings, but Daniel Jones isn't exactly immune to turnovers at this point in his career. Plus, he just got sacked 8 times by the Cardinals. The last one I'd feel comfortable with is the Colts versus the Broncos. Joe Flacco is dust at this point, and the Colts should be home favorites. Plus, they have Darius Leonard back now. If you are one of those people who plans ahead, you've already added the Steelers for this week, and you want to look ahead past that, you've got the Jets facing Miami in week 9. Then they get a home matchup against the Giants. Then they get to play Washington. So they've got really nice matchups the 3 games after next week. So if that's something you like to do, then you've got a really nice option there. Of course, the top option next week is going to be Buffalo versus Washington. But let's be honest, Buffalo's probably owned in your league. All right, let's order these guys. So the claim order is Ty Johnson first, assuming we don't get any news that says Kerryon Johnson's going to play next week. So assuming we don't hear anything about that. Got Ty Johnson first, then Kenny Stills, then Mark Walton, and then Cole Beasley. Only 4 I would put a claim in for. The ads would be Chase Edmonds / Mattison, both of them taking the top spot. Then whatever defense streamer you need. Then Jonnu Smith and Dallas Goedert if you need a tight end. Then the quarterback streamers, those come last because there are a ton of options this week. So I'm sure you're going to find someone that you don't need to put a claim in for, that you can just wait and just see who you want to play, basically, because there's just so many options this week. Then we've got Alex Erickson, Irv Smith, and Guice. So that's it for the Week 8 waiver wires video. If anything crazy happens in the Monday night game, then just look at the pinned comment for an update. I'll be doing trade targets next, followed by start-sit videos later in the week, so be on the lookout for all of those. But that's the end of this one. I hope you all did enjoy. If you did, how about hitting that like button? And if you're new here, how about subscribing to the channel? But thanks for watching.